What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and welcome to my waiver wire and trade video for NFL Week 6 action. I'll be talking to you guys about guys you should be picking up on the waiver wires this week, and guys you should be trying to trade for, as well as trying to get off your teams after their performances so far this season and what I project for them going forward this year. Before I get into anything, make sure if you guys have any questions specifically related to your team, any trade scenarios, any waiver wire adds and drops, make sure to comment that stuff down below, and I'll get to all you guys. I'll give you guys my input and give you some advice on what I think you should be doing if you're looking for some help there. So I'm happy to help all you guys out, and make sure to let me know in the comments section down below. First part of this video is going to be the waiver wire pickups. So if you're looking for the trade stuff, maybe skip ahead like 5 or so minutes into this video. That's when I'll get into the trade stuff. But here I'm going to crank out my waiver wire pickups really quick here. My first guy on the list, obviously Dak Prescott suffered that gruesome leg injury. We're all hoping for the best for him. But in the meantime, Andy Dalton is probably a not very highly owned quarterback in many ESPN leagues, or any leagues in general for that matter. Andy Dalton's a guy you need to go after on the waiver wire this week. I've got Dak Prescott in 4 leagues as my starting quarterback, so I'll certainly be going after Andy Dalton. And this guy who's kind of a game manager, Andy Dalton, is actually quite appealing, and here's why. The Cowboys have probably the best weapon core in the NFL. Cedric Wilson just burst onto the scene as like a star, and he's getting all these reps now in games after he made a bunch of plays against the Seahawks. So Andy Dalton's got 4 legit wide receivers to throw to. He's got Ezekiel Elliott. He's got a solid offensive line, and the tight ends aren't doing half bad themselves. So as well as that defense is garbage, and he's going to have to throw a lot. So Andy Dalton's a guy you should be going for, as well as Chase Edmonds. He's owned in under 50% of ESPN leagues. I think that Chase Edmonds is a guy who is actually better than Kenyon Drake, and I think that he deserves that starting role in Arizona. I'm not necessarily sure that he's going to get it, but when Chase Edmonds gets the football, he makes stuff happen, and he's very efficient with those touches. Another guy, Preston Williams, go after him, go get him. Preston Williams is a guy in draft season who I was super high on. I thought that he was in for a big year. Obviously, coming off that ACL, things were going to be a little bit sluggish to start, and it was kind of painful waiting for him to break out. But finally, he had a big game, 4 catches, 100-plus yards, and a touchdown against the 49ers defense, which is very solid, even though it's banged up. So Preston Williams broke out this week. Go get him on your fantasy team. My next guy is a player who I was actually planning on starting as my second flex player in a 2-flex league, and that's Tim Patrick, the Broncos wide receiver. He's been very, very good in Courtland Sutton's absence. He's been kind of that 1-2 punch behind Jerry Jeudy. He's been getting more targets and more catches than KJ Hamler. So Tim Patrick was a guy I was looking at as a startable player. Obviously, I was very disappointed by the news that the Patriots and Broncos game got kicked, but hopefully in the future, Tim Patrick will be an effective player for your lineups. This is a huge one. Alex Madison of the Minnesota Vikings, in my opinion, is criminally underowned in fantasy football this year. Less than 50% of leagues own Alex Madison. And this is a guy who's honestly one of the more valuable handcuffs in fantasy football. Alex Madison is a fantastic running back. Dalvin Cook is slightly injury prone, and Alex Madison produces when he gets the football. So obviously he doesn't get the ball very much when Cook is healthy, but Dalvin Cook left the game on Sunday Night Football with a groin injury, and with his Week 6 game readiness up in the air, you wonder if Alex Madison is the starter, and if he is, he's an RB1 easily for this week. Another guy here who's kind of been on that waiver wire radar the last few weeks, Greg Ward. Greg Ward has produced for Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz trusts him. Greg Ward didn't have a great volume game this past week against Pittsburgh, but Greg Ward scored a touchdown. So he's a guy that you can flex. He's a solid wide receiver 2 to 3 type guy for your team. So I would feel comfortable picking up Greg Ward and having him on my bench as a stream option. And then teammates with Greg Ward, who's undoubtedly the most impressive wide receiver on that Eagles offense against the Steelers, was Travis Fulgham. Undrafted guy, absolute stud. He was going up and mossing Mike Hilton, their slot corner for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This guy was all over the field. He was making huge plays happen, and he was honestly carrying that offensive load for the Eagles when Miles Sanders wasn't doing it. So Travis Fulgham, go get him on the waiver wire. I think that if the Eagles wide receiver core continues to be banged up, this guy's going to be a starter the rest of the year, and he's going to put up nice numbers for your team. Guy reminds me of a young Alshon Jeffrey, an actual productive on-the-field version of Jeffrey. He's a huge body. He can box players out, and he makes those big catches on the field. All right, here we go. Now we're into the trade stuff. It's time for my sell-high candidates for the NFL Week 6. And we're going to get started with Kenyon Drake of the Arizona Cardinals. I just talked about how I think you should be adding Chase Edmonds and getting as many shares of him as you can in your fantasy leagues. I do not believe in Kenyon Drake. The guy is ineffective with the ball. His touches, his efficiency, it's just not panning out. He's so touchdown dependent, and he's not getting many touchdowns because Kyler Murray runs option on the goal line, and he ends up taking it in himself. So Kenyon Drake is just a guy who I don't want anything to be a part of in fantasy. He doesn't get the passing volume either. And Kenyon Drake is a guy who just had a decent game. He had touchdown, 60 yards against the Jets, which is a really favorable matchup. He should have done a lot better than that. But if you can get another RB2 for Kenyon Drake, he was like a first-round pick in some leagues, and the guy is barely an RB3 right now. So very disappointing numbers from the guy. You really want to see better things from him. So if you can get off Kenyon Drake, if you have the opportunity to trade him for something more valuable, pull the trigger and go for it. Kenyon Drake is not a guy you want in your teams this year. Next up, this is kind of a trash sell high candidate, but you might be able to get someone to bite for Ryan Fitzpatrick. You might get a decent wide receiver 2 or flex player out of it. Ryan Fitzpatrick is a very streaky player. Some weeks he's going to win your game, and other weeks he's going to fall flat on his face and absolutely destroy your team. So if you can bait someone into trading for Ryan Fitzpatrick, go for it. The guy is an absolute legend at times, and he's an absolute dunce in others. So Ryan Fitzpatrick, move off him if you can get a nice offer. But I just thought I'd throw this one out there as a bit of a funny take. My next player is a very legit sell-high candidate, and that is Todd Gurley for the Falcons. Obviously, at one time, Todd Gurley was the best running back in the NFL. He was the best player in fantasy football, and Todd Gurley was an absolute lineup carrier who would just take you to the ship at will. He was scoring multi-touchdown games every week, it seemed. 1,000-yard runner and like a 500-plus yard receiver. Todd Gurley was fantastic, but right now, Todd Gurley, his numbers are nice. He's flashing the self he was once upon a time, but he's not the same player. Trust me, you guys, Todd Gurley is not an RB1. These numbers he's put up the last 2 weeks are purely a result of his matchup. Carolina's run stop is not good. Green Bay's run stop is not good. He got in the end zone 2 weeks in a row. Todd Gurley is a solid RB2 this year. He's not necessarily even a high-end RB2, I would argue, because some games the Falcons get blown out and they don't run the ball at all, and they bring in Brian Hill and Ito Smith, and Todd Gurley is a forgotten part of the offense. If you can get a deal for Todd Gurley, trade him away for another running back who's in a better situation, a better talent. You know the deal. Todd Gurley is a guy who I'd move off of this week. He's had 2 exceptional performances in a row, and I know it's hard to part with guys like this, but this is not going to be his reality the rest of the season. And then going back to my next player, who's a guy who I just talked about in my waiver ads. He's owned in barely under 50% of NFL leagues, but if you have Alex Madison on your roster, you have the opportunity to potentially dump Alex Madison and sacrifice some points in the moment and get a legit starter for down the stretch in the playoffs. So if you think about it, Alex Madison, if we're assuming Dalvin Cook comes back at some point in the year, Alex Madison will be rendered useless for your fantasy team. But if you take the opportunity now and flip him for an RB2 and get a guy who can start for your lineup, get a wide receiver 2 even, or even higher, who knows what the price people would be willing to pay for a starting running back right now would be in your league. Just take advantage of it and see what you can get for a guy like Madison, who's very talented, but his situation and his lucrative time as a starter on your fantasy team is very limited. My last sell-high candidate is Jamison Crowder. Jamison Crowder is a very, very, very solid and sturdy fantasy option in your starting lineup every week, but Jamison Crowder has been playing like a wide receiver 1 the last 2 weeks. The guy is very, very, very good in the Jets offense because he's the only option they have to throw to, but he's not going to be scoring touchdowns on the weekly basis. And Jamison Crowder's numbers are a little bit inflated right now, so I think that you have the opportunity to get a return on investment with Crowder and sell him for more than he's worth, and I think that that could be very advantageous for your team. So I'm personally hanging on to Crowder myself in my leagues just because I want those points in my lineup, and I know the consistency is there. But if you can somehow get a player who just came off of a rough little stretch, like some players might be willing to trade Julio Jones for him just because they're not sure if he's going to come back from injury. Obviously, once Julio Jones comes back, he's going to be better than Jamison Crowder on a week-to-week basis. Julio is like a top 3 receiver in the league, and Crowder is probably like a top 20 or 30 guy. So Crowder is better at fantasy football than he is in the actual game of football. So if you can flip Crowder for more than he's worth, I would go for it. All right, so those are my sell high candidates. Those are guys that you can probably get off your hands for more than they're worth right now due to inflated numbers from them the past couple weeks. But now it's time to get into my buy low candidates, who are guys who struggled this past week or who have even had struggles over a small stretch of time that might be causing owners to panic. You might be able to capitalize off of those emotional players. So my first guy on the list is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He had a fantastic opening night on Thursday Night Football against the Texans. The dude got the rock like 20-plus times. He had over 100 scrimmage yards. He had a touchdown, and CEH looked amazing. Ever since then, his numbers have kind of tailed off every week. He's kind of regressed week by week slowly and painfully, and fantasy owners are probably starting to get frustrated. I own a share of him myself, and I'm getting frustrated because I paired him as a ceiling play, as a PPR monster with Josh Jacobs. And when Josh Jacobs is the guy scoring more points, who's an absolute standard play, the guy doesn't get any receptions. He gets like 2 a game, and he gets like 70 yards and is touchdown dependent. It's really frustrating. So if you guys are looking for a running back who could potentially win your league for you, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the guy to go for. I mean, Clyde Edwards is not getting the numbers right now, but he has the potential still. The Chiefs just lost a game, so they probably need to work the run into the game more. Their offense needs to become less pass dependent. I know they have Pat Mahomes. He's the best player in the league, according to most people and most people's opinions. But you got to run the football more if you're Kansas City. I think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire goes up from here, and he's a guy you should be going after at all costs. I was just talking about how I have a Josh Jacobs pair for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If you guys can pull off a trade in a PPR league, Josh Jacobs for Clyde Edwards, go do it. I mean, Clyde Edwards is going to get way more receptions, and that alone can replace Jacobs' touchdown value. I think that Clyde Edwards is extremely talented, and I would take that trade if I'm being completely honest. Next man up is DJ Chark. I just had like a 3.1 point half PPR game against the Texans. Roby absolutely shut him down for Houston. I think that DJ Chark is the clear one on his team. Chenault had all the work on Sunday afternoon, though, because he had that softer coverage from not as talented corners. But I think that DJ Chark is a guy who, down the stretch, is going to be really good for your teams. Last week, I believe he was actually on my sell high list because he had a really great game, and I knew that he was coming into a tough matchup, so I was telling you guys to get your hands off of him right now while you could. But on the flip side of things, he just had a really ugly matchup. I didn't think it was going to be quite this ugly, and I didn't expect him to be a buy low candidate at all. But DJ Chark just came off of a terrible performance, so if you guys can go snatch him up, he's a guy who's probably going to be a low-end wide receiver 1 to a high-end wide receiver 2 the rest of the stretch of the season. This next player might be my second favorite buy low candidate of the year, and that's Tyler Lockett. The guy was an absolute monster the first 3-ish weeks of the season, and then the last 2 weeks he's had 2 down weeks in a row, which is an absolute recipe for panicking fantasy owners who all of a sudden think that he's not good anymore and are trying to get off of him. Tyler Lockett and Russell Wilson have one of the most special wide receiver to quarterback connections in the NFL. Tyler Lockett is an absolute beast, and if you can get your hands on him, the guy he's a wide receiver 1. It's really not up for debate. If you guys can get Tyler Lockett, go do it. I think the price on him is extremely low right now. I don't think that you can trade dirt cheap stuff for him, but the price that you would have had to pay weeks 1 through 3 is up here, and the price now is like settling down here in the middle. I think that you can trade an RB2 for him. I think you might be able to get a Zach Ertz type trade, like a tight end that has a name and a wide receiver 2 for him. I think that there's a lot of advantageous trades for Tyler Lockett out there. I would not give up a running back 1 for him. The thing with trades is you have to weigh the value. You have to figure out who the best player in the trade is and try to go for that. Or at least if you're trading away the best player, you have to get the most value in return for your starting lineup. So weigh your options, but I think that Tyler Lockett is a fantastic guy to go after. And if you can get him on your team for the rest of the season, I think that's very good for you. I just talked about Zach Ertz a little bit. I think that a lot of people are panicking, including myself, on Zach Ertz. I'm not going to be one of the people who gives him up for dirt cheap, who panics and offers him for a low price, but I think that there's a vastly large share of the fantasy community that owns Ertz that is willing to get rid of him at all costs right now. Zach Ertz is tight end 17, which doesn't even make him a tight end 1 at this point in the season. That's atrocious. Zach Ertz is usually a perennial top 5 tight end. He's usually 2 or 3 at the position, and this year he's just been awful. Zach Ertz has been really disappointing. I picked him high in my draft because I love getting those top flight tight ends. And Zach Ertz has been a huge disappointment. 1 catch for 6 yards this week. It's just awful. But Zach Ertz is a guy I think that you guys can go after and get for very, very cheap. I think that he probably doesn't hold much value to a lot of owners at this point in the season. So I think people are giving up on him, and rightfully so. I mean, the numbers are not there to back up his case, but he still has that name. So it might be a little bit more of a struggle to get him off of another team in your league, but you can certainly go and trade for him and keep your fingers crossed that he gets back on track, because if he does, he's a monster. But if he keeps up this, he's looking washed. Getting close to wrapping this video up, I've got 2 wide receivers who I think their injuries could play a big part in their trade value, and that's Julio Jones and Chris Godwin. Both of them have been dealing with injuries that have been hampering them, keeping them out of games. And I think that these are both elite talents who you can get for a lower price than you would ever expect right now. I think the Chris Godwin owners are getting very impatient. He's missed a bunch of weeks, probably more than expected. So if you can get Chris Godwin, you can probably get him at a very nice reduced price. Like I said, with all these guys, don't give up too much for them. If you have any questions, make sure to comment down below. I'll tell you if the trade is worth it or not, if you're getting good enough value or if you're giving up too much. So Julio Jones, Chris Godwin, go after him. Those injuries are lowering their value. And then finally, this is a bit of an iffy one, but Terry McLaurin had a rough game. I like to put these guys on here who are really consistent players and all of a sudden drop off a cliff because people like to panic. It's not necessarily that I think you should be selling Terry McLaurin, because I think that he's a great player, especially for fantasy teams. But Terry McLaurin, a little bit of a down week. He's been phenomenal up to this point, though. Capitalize on an opportunity if it presents itself. Alrighty, that'll do it for my NFL Week 6 buy low, sell high candidates, as well as my waiver wire pickups for Week 6. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel and turn that bell on so you never miss an episode. I appreciate you guys for your time. Continue to support the SFS channel, and I'll continue making videos like this. I'm trying to get better every time I do this, so if there's anything I can do better, make sure to let me know, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.